Well, good morning, LinkedIn. My name is Joel Bennett, and I'd like to welcome you to this episode of Practical Leadership, an opportunity for you to learn more about how to be a more effective leader and build leadership habits into your daily work. If you are tuning in live, thanks for being here. Please say hello in the comments and tell us where you're tuning in from. Each week, it's good to see kind of repeat visitors, folks that have become not only friends, but engaged in the whole process. But it's also fun to see new people and to hear from new folks. So regardless of what category you're in, please introduce yourself there. And if you joined us for last week's session with Ruby Brown Herring on a leader's role in team well-being, I'd love for you to share what types of ways over the last week have you been focusing in on the health and wellness of your team, especially during a very busy time. If you've never been here before, or if you have and you need a reminder, during these sessions, we try to tackle real life issues that leaders are having, topics and challenges that are important to you, and try to encourage you to apply what you're learning and provide real actionable steps for building that into your leadership practices and the team culture you're trying to create. So I've asked leadership experts from around the world to join me to share their own experiences, perspectives, their wisdom. And today I'm pleased to be joined by Ellen Feldman-Ornato. Ellen helps organizations engage team members in improving their productivity and their sense of belonging in their organization. So thanks for joining me, Ellen. It's great to see you.
Oh, delighted to be here.
So today our topic is going to be around leading across generational differences. And that seems to be a hot topic in the workplace right now. Mm-hmm. I posted earlier this morning that, if I had $1 for every time I heard people talk about what they feel like are generational differences, I could retire a little bit early. I'll be interested to see what we hear from the folks joining us today and what they see, as well as digging into the conversation. So before we get a chance to hear some more of Ellen's thoughts on this, I just want to encourage you to be as active as possible in the comments. This is a journey for us too, and we'd love to get your perspectives as well as your experience that you've had along the way. There may be some things that you agree with, and we'd love to hear some reinforcement on that, and some things you may disagree with, and we'd love your questions as well. So feel free to drop those into the comments as we go. So let's see who's already got a chance to join us this morning. Nurdan, thanks for coming back. It's great to see you. Megan, thanks for joining us from Rockford. David in Oskaloosa, thanks for coming again today. Patty, I think this may be your first time on, which is fantastic. Thanks for joining us. If not, I apologize if I missed you the last time. And Megan, who everyone should know, I think has been at every episode, or potentially at least over a dozen of them. So Megan continues to wear the crown. So if you want to knock that off her head, you're going to have to either watch a lot of the recordings or show up for season 2.
I love that.
So it looks like we've got a pretty full house. So I want to go ahead and get started. Ellen, you and I had a pretty long conversation on this topic a few months ago. Mm-hmm. And I think we both recognize that what the world would maybe share around generational differences, or what they expect to be generational differences, they seem to have a lot to say. But what do you see as the biggest challenge for leaders in regards to generational differences, or at least what they perceive to be generational differences?
Well, first of all, thank you, Joel. I think the biggest challenge for leaders is to recognize that their viewpoint of what leadership is and how it should be is entirely based on their lived experience. So if you look at we do most of our work in architecture, engineering, construction, and manufacturing. And if you look at the most senior leaders, sometimes it's the owners of the organizations. These are people who are in their 60s, maybe, right? And that means that they either founded the company or acquired it, and they've been there for a while. Or in the case of manufacturing, that they were brought into the company and then learned their leadership style from somebody who was likely part of the World War II generation.
Right.
So, and which was really, after World War II and what happened in the industrial sector in the United States, you wound up with a lot of sort of command and control kinds of leadership. That leadership was a reflection of post-military involvement. And a lot of that came directly into the workplace. And so sort of that top down, my uncle used to say, when I want your opinion, I'll rattle your cage kind of leadership, do as I say. That was the predominant style of leadership for a very long time. And so there's a groundswell of people who are saying there are other ways of doing this that incorporate more of our ideas. If you go to the tail end of who's in the workplace right now, they expect to be heard for the most part,
Oh,
want to be heard, want to make a contribution, are used to being able to comment on things. And if there's a huge gap in terms of expectation of how much I'm expected to say and contribute between here and here, you wind up with friction, disengagement at the lower level of the organization, and confusion sometimes at the top levels of the company where they're saying people just don't want to stay. I don't understand why people don't want to work.
right.
And the challenge is that people want to work differently. So how we help the most senior leaders understand that the people at the very entry level do want to work, and it's just they're going to want to work differently and maybe have a little bit more flexibility. All of this comes into play, and then the people in the middle are just sort of mashed in between different expectations and trying to sort of be something to everybody.
Yeah.
I was talking to somebody the other day. He said, I literally feel like I have to put up an umbrella to protect my people from the senior leaders of this organization.
Huh.
Because the way they are, the way they interact, the way they want to be treated is so radically different from the folks up here, and how they expect that people will respond to them, the level of like instant respect versus earned respect. It's just there's a big gap, but there's also a huge opportunity.
Absolutely. I like a number of the things that you said there, and one of them is around it's based on our experience, and you focus in on kind of the owner's experience. But I often, when we teach on this subject or I have conversations with leaders on this subject, I think they almost believe that the generations themselves, like that there's like this hard line of like, oh, well, we always say if you're born from this time to this time, you're probably in this generation.
Mm-hmm.
But it's almost like that when we're born, we get a stamp on the back of our neck, like, oh, you're a baby boomer, or oop, you're a millennial.
Right.
The problem with that is a lot of what we see, or at least what we perceive is going on with that generation, is less about the date they were born and sometimes more around the part of their life that they're in. And so the joke I always tell is, when baby boomers were born and they were entering into the workforce, their parents, which would have been, potentially that World War II generation, would say, boy, this generation just doesn't know how to work. They don't want to work hard. All they do is listen to loud music and smoke pot, right? And then the baby boomers had kids, which were probably Gen Xers like me. And they said the same thing. Like, this generation feels so entitled. They don't want to work hard. They don't know what work really is. They listen to loud music and they smoke pot. I mean, and now we get to, Generation Y, Generation Z, whatever the next generation is going to be. And it feels like the same complaints are always there.
All right. They listen to EDM and they buy pot legally now in most states. So, right.
So it's kind of a joke, but it's not. I mean,
It's not.
if I'm straight out of college and I am saddled with a ton of debt, one of the things on my radar screen is going to be, I want to work for a company where I feel like I'm well respected, where I can create a career, but to be honest, where I can make enough money to make ends meet.
Right.
And if I'm mid-career, I've got kids or maybe kids that are going into college and I need flexibility. That's just going to be part of the game. I mean, are there other ways that you're seeing that at play?
Well, I think, that there was like a world event that happened in 2020 until roughly 2022 that flipped how we work on its head as well. So people went from I live to work to I work to live. And that shift happened in people's own homes when they realized that they were, a lot of them, much more productive without all of the outside, driving to work and having unnecessary meetings, although Zoom fatigue was a real thing. So there's that bubble as well. That really, it sort of was it leveled the playing field between generations, I think, kind of mashed it down where everybody said, this is a much more sane way for me to put in my 6 or 8 hours a day when I can sit here and wear sweatpants and my dog can be at my feet and I don't have to drive both ways, which granted didn't work in manufacturing for people on the floor or for people in construction who had to be out in the field. But a huge percentage of the workforce worked from home and went, not only can I work from home and be more productive, I can also apply for another job. And the only distinction between that job and the new job is I turn on a computer screen and there are new people there, right? That like the whole, I'm going to leave this job and start a new job and I might have to relocate. So much of that has gotten consolidated as well. It's no longer a generational preference. It might just be a preference, right? Yeah. So I loved what you were pointing to, which was that we stereotype groups based on generalities about when they were born. And it's even like, the phases of life that we go through are very different for people. So age is just one factor in the who and how we are within the workplace. And yet it's the one of the more visible ones, right? So we have biases that are built in about older people in technology, for example.
Yeah.
Or adaption of technology, or younger people and aptitude with technology. Right. And so it becomes like, how do we just sort of disentangle the person from their age and actually just look at who they are, what their interests are, where their strengths are, and how to work best with them?
Yeah. Yeah. The technology one is something we hear all the time, right? Well, they're younger and so they're always on their devices, or they really are good with computers. Mm-hmm. The flip side, though, is I don't know an adult now, and truthfully, most 4-year-olds that don't have their own smartphone.
Right.
So we all are on technology all day long. Mm-hmm. Some of us more than others. Some of us are maybe more adept than others. But to just out of the gate say, oh, well, they're in an older generation, so they're not very good with technology is too much of an overgeneralization.
Right. My 88-year-old mother
in the younger generation that don't love it. Right. They don't want to be. They would rather be face to face and having conversations and those types of things. Mm-hmm. So when you think about how leaders and how leaders lead their teams, what do you feel like the younger generations, and I'll use younger and let's use generation X and Y, or excuse me, Y and Z, because I think most of the time Y and Z is anybody younger than me is now, I'll hear those millennials and I'm like, well, actually millennials, many of them have kids now. So let's.
Oh yeah, right.
If we want to go to Y and Z, what do those generations expect and need from their leaders to stay engaged in the workplace or to perform at their best?
Feedback. So this is a generation that is used to getting a lot of feedback. They're used to using multiple modes of communication, email being the last, right? So they're more likely to text or IM than they are to send a long email. That once again, I think the pandemic affected a lot of people's ability to be present for long periods of time in any kind of meeting. So meeting length, and also sort of they're most likely to say, why am I here? One of the things that happened during the pandemic is a lot of people invited everybody to every meeting. And over time, hopefully they started to use a little bit more discretion about who was in the room. But this is a generation that these two generations will, what we find, often ask, why am I here? And what do you want me to be learning right now? Otherwise, can I go do something else?
Right.
Whereas I was just talking with somebody who's, she's a CFO of a big company. And she said, it would never occur to me to say to my boss, why are you inviting me to this meeting? And why do you need my time right now? She said, I would figure if he invited me, he needed me there, which is a really nice thing with Microsoft Outlook. Now you can say optional instead of invited, which is this little discretionary thing. Like you can opt out, right? And I think part of that is in response to people saying, do I really need to be here? And we don't need to invite everybody. So they tend to be more vocal. And the other gap that I've seen that's huge is the expectation sometimes at senior levels that somebody wants to come in at the entry level and work in one place for their entire career. Right? Like you can have a great career here and we want to retain you and you can be a senior partner. And they're like, I'm planning to change jobs 5 or 6 times before I become a partner in a firm. So a lot of those structures aren't attractive, and we may be dangling the wrong carrot to get engagement from those couple of generations worth of people in the workplace, right? They want opportunities to learn, cross training and development, flexibility, things that I didn't ask about when I was in a job interview. They want diverse, and lots of people want to work in diverse environments where the DEIB component within the organization is a real thing and not a poster on the wall.
Right.
Right. And so we see companies that actually have a turnstile of they hire for diversity, they bring people in, and they just sort of dump them into the existing culture. And then those folks leave and they blame it on the person who's leaving, that they couldn't adapt to the culture. And the question is, what about the culture didn't work for that person? And how do you change your culture? How do you adapt your climate so that it works for everybody? And this isn't about creating a special environment. This is about creating an environment where people are using emotional intelligence, right? Are giving people opportunities to learn something different. There's an active mentorship program. Things that you and I know are sort of table stakes in larger organizations that small and medium-sized organizations just either don't think about as important or don't have the bandwidth to do.
Yeah. I think, and you hit on this point earlier, you started off with feedback. And sometimes it's the speed of feedback that I'm seeing being maybe a little bit different need than it was when I first came into the workplace, because when I first came to the workplace, email was kind of the main way that we communicated. Not always the best way to communicate, but it was the main way that we communicated. But it was also during a time where, it was pretty novel to have a one-on-one meeting with your boss once a week. Right. It was probably more normal to have a monthly staff meeting, or potentially you may have a weekly staff meeting, but one-on-one time with your boss was pretty few and far between. And so what I'm seeing a lot more now is that those younger two generations are expecting to have more interaction time with their boss, and whether it's just feedback on how am I doing, or just feedback in general, like what are we working on, how is it going, right. Where are we headed with this, how can I help more? And I've found that some leaders get frustrated with that, because it's like, man, they want so much of my time and they're constantly bothering me, and I have to remind them, was like, but if that's what it's going to take to help them do their job better and move faster and be more productive and be more equipped to do things in the future, why couldn't we adapt to that, right? And it doesn't mean that you're having a one-on-one every day with your people, but it could mean that you have a specific rhythm to touch points, and your accessibility to them is maybe a little bit different than it would have been a decade ago. Are you seeing the same thing?
Yeah, oh, definitely. And I think that there are a lot of people who are in leadership positions today who were managers who were put in leadership positions without a very distinctive conversation and development piece, which is the distinction between managing and leading. And so if you ask them how they spend their time and put them through, is it the Eisenhower quadrant? Yeah. And they look at like how much stuff they do every day that they should be delegating and they don't, or could be delegating and they won't. And then you say, well, you're telling me you don't have time to check in with your team. And if we look at how you're spending your time, let's just look at that. Where could you free up some time? And then they go, and it gets to, what am I doing that I don't need to be doing at all? So let's stop doing that and prioritize checking in with our team and building people up as one of my key ways that I spend time across the week. So sometimes it's just inviting them to look at how they're actually spending their time and whether they're making the best use of the resources that they have to support them. And then we have to train them on how to have casual conversations with our employees that aren't just about productivity and getting things done or pointing out what's wrong.
Right.
It's sort of like, how can I shine a light on things you're doing right, or things I appreciate, or helping people understand, for themselves what they're doing well and how they could be growing.
And that's the environment you're trying to create, right? When you talked about creating a culture that people want to be around or want to stick around for,
Yeah.
It's that, right? Having some sort of personal connection with your leadership, having a personal connection with your team,
Yeah.
getting the communication you need to do your job well. I mean, Gallup has a ton of questions in all the different surveys that they ask, and a big part of it is that, right? Do I have a connection with my boss, my team? Do I feel like my work matters?
Right.
If I have those things, then that's, the old career ladder and opportunities makes more sense, right? Because I
Right.
want to stay here. But if I have a career ladder, but this place isn't a great place to work, or my boss never gives me the feedback I need to feel like I'm doing a good job, or that allows me to do a good job,
Right.
then yeah, I'm going to go someplace else to learn, to have other opportunities, to have maybe more stability too, and flexibility too, in the way that I do my work.
Right. And I think at the most senior level, it's an invitation to look at what your belief systems are around what people need from you. Right. So we're working with a company right now. We're putting cohorts of their managers through a 6-month emotional intelligence program so that they can learn how to give positive feedback. I mean, it's sort of the gateway into how do you give feedback and how do you talk to people and how do you notice when your emotions are offline and maybe you shouldn't be giving commentary to somebody, as a way to get them to think about the positive effects of giving positive feedback.
Right.
But we asked a question going into it. Will they be measured? Is their performance based on how engaged their employees are and how they feel about them? And if the answer is no, and their compensation is based on productivity, the question, then that's a higher level question, which is how are you evaluating the people in your management structure? And do you put a high value on staying connected with your workforce, understanding what their development needs are, having what's now known as stay conversations with people on a
Right.
regular basis to understand how to retain them. Because that's not been an articulated expectation for managers, many managers, particularly in small and medium companies.
So let's go there next. Because we talked about there are some differences between the generations, but
Mm-hmm.
how can leaders develop a culture or environment that welcomes and engages members from all generations? What are some other things that you would suggest?
Ask the ones you have. I think the best way that you can create a positive climate within your organization that's going to attract people in regardless of age is making sure that the climate that's in your organization that exists is one where people feel welcome, they feel like they can ask questions, right? That they don't see people screaming at people and calling people out in front of whole groups of people, embarrassing, shaming, blaming, all of the stuff that causes people to shut down and disengage, that you're acting quickly when people are behaving like that to make it clear that that's not how we're going to interact with people. And if it is, that you have a performance improvement plan and you follow through on it, because all of that creates the climate where somebody new coming in would say, this is a friendly place. I feel comfortable asking questions, and they get acclimated fairly quickly, right? That's the other question is your first 6 weeks for somebody new coming into your organization robust, intentional? Are they learning? Do they ally with somebody right away, regardless of age?
Right.
Right? How do we create a sticky environment? That's all about helping somebody feel like they belong as quickly as possible
Yeah.
and removing barriers to that as well.
That's a great one. One of the things I do see in manufacturing and construction, I know we share a little bit of that, is when the new guys come, the young folks, we kind of keep all them together.
Yeah.
And the veterans kind of have their own crews or their own teams, and we do kind of create these artificial walls. So the more that organizations can say, no, we do want there to be connections between, whether it's different ages or different skill sets, or you got your veterans and your newbies.
Right.
How can we cross pollinate as much as possible, because it can be helpful to both.
Right.
And truthfully, from a business perspective, allows a lot more continuity when those types of things are being shared, instead of oh shoot, John just retired and 35 years worth of knowledge walked out with him, and I'm expecting somebody who
Absolutely.
just started a year ago to pick up all that slack. It's just not fair.
Yeah, the knowledge transfer thing has to happen, because especially now that baby boomers are retiring at record numbers, leaving the workforce, how do you make sure that the best practices and the critical information and the understanding of the organization doesn't go out the door with them, and that, you know, we're giving them an opportunity to transfer that knowledge, best practices to somebody who's likely to stay in the organization.
Right.
Right. So I think that that's super important.
All right. So I just recognized that, boy, we've been talking a while. We've got a handful of minutes left here. I want to go to the comments quick, and then I'm going to ask us to move to that. What's that one step we can take? David talked a lot about was reinforcing your point on, you know, there are just a lot of processes in place to accommodate or support how we used to do it, but maybe trying to use those processes in a new environment or with a new team that aren't as engaged with those processes. How do we do that? And so this changing the way we've always done things to really match the needs of the folks that work here is an important. Nordon was also saying that, you know, coaching is an essential skill that leaders need to build regardless of the generation they're in, and creating a psychologically safe and inclusive environment with that coaching support can really create an environment that's positive for all. So, so as we end today, you know that we like to keep things simple and practical. What's the one step that somebody watching today could put into place, even, you know, right away, to start creating a better culture for the generations that they work with?
I would say suspend what you think you already know about a person and actually talk to them. Age is only one indicator of who the person is, right? Their life experience, people have multiple careers. You have no idea who they are and what they bring to the table, regardless of their age. And why not give them the opportunity to express what they know they're good at, so that you can create connections,
right,
and synergies, and, you know, make the most of the people you have, regardless of age or any other aspect of diversity, really. That's
awesome. Well, gang, you know, if you've been part of this before, you know this is the point where I say, let's actually do something with what we've learned today. You know, you've spent almost a half hour with us, learning more about generational differences and similarities. And hopefully there's been something that's popped for you, or something you found both interesting, but also maybe a little bit convicting. But if that time that you just spent is something you don't do anything with, then it's going to be completely wasted. So with that in mind, I'm going to ask you to identify one thing that you can commit to doing over the next 7 days to take your leadership to the next level. And it may be just what Ellen said, asking more questions, getting people's perspectives, maybe breaking some of your assumptions. But when we get back together next week, I'd love to hear how that went, what you tried, what improved, maybe what other challenges that you ran into. So take 15 seconds now, drop that in the comments. We'd love to see what you're going to be working on. And while you do that, I want to thank you, Ellen, for being a part of this today. I think this is a topic that gets asked a lot, and I do think there are some misconceptions on, and I really think that what you've shared has been helpful.
Thank you, Joel. And thank you for being just an amazing host. It's been delightful to work with you through this process, and thank you for bringing me to your audience. I really appreciate it.
You're very welcome. If you'd like to get a hold of Ellen and hear more about her work, I'd encourage you to reach out to her on LinkedIn and follow her posts. She is especially her work, not only in the generational areas, but Ellen has a great background in improv and creativity. And so she's got a lot to offer there. So to reach out to her and learn more. So that brings us to next week, which is interesting because it's going to be the end of season 1. And we're going to try to end it with a bang. I'm honored to have the Senior Director of Thought Leadership at Chorus, and strangely enough, my brother, Sean Bennett, join me to explore building team potential through feedback. And so for those of you that in the comments over the last 15 episodes who had said, maybe I've been raised by wolves, I hope you'll be here to kind of dispel that myth. But keep your eyes on the LinkedIn event postings. Or drop a note in the comments, and I'd be happy to invite you to that session. It's going to be a fun way for us to end this season. And you know, don't tell my brother Sean, but he does know quite a bit on the topic. So if you found this useful, hopefully you'll join us again next Wednesday. And if you're willing, invite a friend who you think might have interest in the topic or benefit from it. And if you stumbled upon this video on LinkedIn, on YouTube, and we're not connected on LinkedIn, feel free to drop me a note and we'll remedy that. So again, I encourage you to take something you learned today and put it into practice as soon as today so that you can be the leader that your team needs from you right now.
Nice.
But regardless, I want to thank you again for joining us, and I hope to see you again next week. Blessings.